Hi everyone, thanks so much for tuning in. My name's Nicola Kemp and I'm Editorial Director of Creative Brief. The Gerety Awards are unique because they judge all advertising, not just advertising made for women, through the female lens. It's a lens we desperately need, creatively, economically, socially, and one that increasingly we need to champion and fight for. So according to the World Economic Forum's Global Gender Gap Report 2022, on the world's current rate of progress, we will have to wait 132 years until we reach true gender parity. Now, I definitely don't want to wait that long, so I am super grateful to be joined by 4 amazing creative women successfully shifting the lens. So Mickey Brunner is Worldwide ECD at Publicis Consel France. She's an international creative director with 20 years of experience crafting and leading 360 campaigns for global brands. Imali Heterachi is global brand strategist at Lego Group, and she's fulfilling a childhood dream by helping to shape the long-term brand strategy for Lego Friends and think about how one of the world's most creative brands can change the world for girls. Tanya Grubner is Global Innovation, Marketing and Communications Director at Essity. She's a global marketer, passionate about growing businesses by building brands with a purpose worthy of being invited into culture. And at Essity, she's successfully disrupted the feminine care category. And last but not least, Dagmar Whitener-Kuzmunda is an award-winning Chief Creative Director at Publicis Worldwide Poland, and she's Vice President for Communications of the Foundation Kids Children's Hospital Innovations Club. So thank you so much for joining us today. And I'm so sorry for starting with that horrendous stat, but it centers us all in the discussion in terms of how we really need to champion and cherish the female lens. So with that in mind, Tanya, I'd love to jump off with you because Essity was a huge winner. Congratulations. And Pink Stories, such a compelling example of just the power of lived experience and the female lens. So I'd love to hear from you as to why you think that lens is important.
I think through the work with Libres and Body Form over the last couple of years, what we realized is that women's experiences, especially when it comes to periods, women's bodies, their vaginas, are very much silenced. They're overlooked and they are repressed. Even we are censored with our advertising when we are revealing what's normal. And I think the impact it has is damaging. So just to give you a few examples, so girls are told that they need to put up with their pain, and as a result, pain is underrepresented. Women are underdiagnosed, and endometriosis, which was one of the topics of pain stories, takes 7 years to diagnose, despite 1 in 10 women suffering from it. Women or young girls are also told that they need to have babies. So women are suffering depression because of infertility issues, and they are fearing to open up about it, even though 1 in 4 pregnancies are ending in miscarriage. Girls are told that often their only purpose in life is reproduction. So when you then enter, or when women enter menopause, it makes us all feel less worthy. And then also all the myth of women or girls needing to want to have babies means that female pleasure is very much secondary, and not wanting to conceive is often being judged as either sad or as being egoistic. And I think this is an environment where taboos and this culture of silence is damaging not only for women but for society in general. So I believe that we as brands who lead brands globally, who have a big reach, have almost like an obligation or the opportunity to shine a light on that, to reveal what's normal, to bring the female lens into culture and society, and to open up this dialogues to just make the world a little bit better to live in for everyone. And I think what we see is that if you do that, then the work is resonating with women and men globally. and that we're moving from very much from silence to solidarity.
I love that. And I love that shift from silence to solidarity. I mean, that truth is just oxygen in the room. And it's so easy to think this is an abstract conversation, but you think of those women who've suffered for 7 years with endometriosis. This lens has real world consequences on everyone. And Amali, I'd love to bring you in on that, because there is such a role, and Lego friends, you know, we have Lego friends in our house, and it shows possibilities. You know, we need to be showing girls possibilities, not painful consequences of not applying or attributing themselves to stereotypes. And I'd love to get your view. I mean, what do you think the role is for marketers to really champion and change the game, not just in terms of the work, but who's making that work in the first place?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing to really recognize is not just how important and needed the female lens is, everything Tanya's just been talking about, but also how lucrative the female lens is. You know, I was just reading this morning about Reese Witherspoon selling her production company, Hello Sunshine, for $900 million. And, you know, the model for that is really simple. It's creating and selling shows based on books written by female authors that have female protagonists in them. So I think changing the game in terms of who's behind the lens is absolutely about the makers, but I think it's also more upstream of production. You know, it's also who's deciding which stories we tell and what messages are important to communicate. But I think in terms of making sure there are enough women behind the lens, you know, I'd love to see more risk-taking and more experimentation from people, client side and brand side. I was listening to this great clip by Bozoma St. John, who's ex-CMO of Netflix. And she was talking about how she went about trying to solve the diversity problem when she was trying to hire more Black women and more women of color in tech. And she said, you know what, I'm just going to hire myself. I'm just going to keep hiring myself. So she kept hiring women of color. She kept hiring sort of amazing women of color, pretty much exclusively, which started to raise some eyebrows from HR, understandably, but she did get the numbers up. So I think, you know, the learning there is, why not demand an all-female team or an all-female crew for a campaign, especially if that work is designed to celebrate the female experience in some way. So I think, yeah, going all the way and being a little bit radical sometimes when it comes to who's behind the lens, you know, it might ruffle some feathers, but it makes a point and it makes a difference.
Thank you so much. And I love that you mentioned just how lucrative this is, because I think we've got a narrative, especially in the business press, which is very male dominated, actually, about purpose or profit, as if they're mutually exclusive pursuits, which is just so misleading. And Nikki, I'd love to bring you in here, because that idea of radical change is very creatively exciting as well. And that stat that we talked about, that 132 years, it's a stubborn stat. But what positive trends are you seeing when it comes to really inclusive creativity?
Well, it's really interesting, because for me, the shift in, say, the last 10 years has been, say, a focus from the female lens or feminism to a kind of humanism, really radically saying that this point of view of inclusion and diversity is a radical kind of humanism. And that's interesting in terms of creative work. And I'm thinking to what, you know, everyone said about really putting an ROI to it. You know, when we can start to show particularly risk adverse brands or less diverse brands that there's money to be made, there's a kind of, you know, populism and a turn and interest for these stories, then it's easier. But I think I need to be more radical in my approach and try and hire me. I've never done that, but I would like to.
I think that would be a good thing for the industry as well. I love the hire me approach. It's a brilliant strategy. And Dagmara, I'd love to bring you in here, because as women in the creative industries, in fact, all progressive leaders in the creative industries, this is like the one thing and the one time where we're allowed to just go, are we there yet? Are we there yet? Are we there yet? And it not to be asked too many times. But how do we get there faster when it comes to equality and inclusivity?
First of all, if you are trying to solve the problem for someone whose shoes you have never walked in, you are not likely to hit the mark. And I think as women leaders in this room, we all probably have to run an extra mile, not only to get a fancy title in front of our names, but also to have some influence, finally have some influence. So I think this is now our responsibility, also our responsibility to make sure that we do our best to progress with equality within our teams, our workplace, but also the industry. And saying equality, I mean not only inviting women to the table, but also inviting people with different gender identities, people with disabilities, people with different ethnic and cultural origins, and also of different age. So we should take care of it, and when we invite those people to the table, when we invite them to be the team members, but also make them leaders, we need to make sure they are equally paid, because I don't know if you are aware of it, but in Poland, for example, some research say that we have a 20% payment gap. So this is still something that we need to take care of, to make sure that we do have this equality. And then we need to support those who we include with mentorship, with knowledge to help them to leverage their leadership skills. And the fact is that we will all benefit out of it, because various research show that diverse teams are more innovative, and that's what is the biggest challenge for all of us and for the industry, to be more innovative.
That's such a good point, and it's so interesting that the conversation around innovation and diversity sometimes it happens in a silo. You've got, you know, the metaverse conversation over there and the D&I conversation over there, and actually D&I can really drive innovation. And with that innovation in mind, there was such a rich diversity of work in the winners of the Gerety Awards. I mean, there always is, but there's always something that surprises you, or some beautiful craft, or something that really makes you feel different, makes you consider something through a new lens. And I'd love to talk about some of those beautiful pieces of work and some of the trends within them. And Mickey, could I put you on the spot? I mean, what was the standout trend from the winning work for you?
Well, for me, for those of you that were on the jury with me, you know that I'm obsessed with the gay raptor from Ford. And there's many reasons for it. You know, first of all, to have, you know, as an American, to see this really like sort of macho, like legacy brand like Ford put its money where its mouth is, really, with this campaign, to not only engage socially and say, you know what, we've been about, you know, gay and lesbian rights forever, but now we're going to talk about it. And then also to make the product, I was in love with it, you know. And I think it's really interesting that brands are hyper aware of not virtue signaling, because you can't anymore. Consumers are too savvy, they're on it, they're watching. And so purpose-led work can't just be this superficial flash in the pan. You've got to have teeth to it. It's got to have longevity. It has to have real commitment. And I noticed that on several campaigns.
I love that example. And I love that it's not necessarily the first brand you would associate with that sort of idea, which is fabulous. And Emali, I'd love to bring you in here, because there was a lot of humanity and purpose in that award-winning work, which really jars with that sort of media narrative that I touched on in terms of purpose versus profit, that you touched on as well, in terms of actually the great profits and revenue that are to be made simply by really depicting people as they are. Do you think, separate to that narrative, that we are actually seeing a really sustained shift towards purpose in the work?
Possibly, but I have to be honest and say that I hope we're not seeing a sustained shift to purpose, because I think that puts everyone under a lot of pressure to say something meaningful and societal in every campaign, every time. And I think that's just not real life, and that's not always going to be the case. And I think in this conversation about purpose, we also need to zoom out of our, relatively small industry and look at how is our approach to purpose perceived, and you look at the likes of Saturday Night Live, or you look at that Irish comedian that recently created that banking spoof ads, and, people are taking the mick out of our approach, or some of the ways we approach purposeful advertising. It's kind of a genre of comedy now, and people think it's hilarious. So I think we have to keep reminding ourselves of what culture thinks about some of the ways we're doing purpose, and just to keep our feet on the ground. But I guess in contrast to that, when I look at the work and I look at the winners, most of my favorites slot into that category of purpose. And the reason I think they're successful is because they come from a place of truth. This is really related to what Mickey was saying. There's a freshness to it, that they take you somewhere you haven't been before. Pain stories, unfiltered history. There's two of my standouts, and you can just tell a mile away that everybody who worked on them was really invested in the issue and the problem that they're setting out to do something about. And I think that's how they arrived at such compelling, innovative, and useful creative solutions. So for me, it isn't about, is purpose good? Is purpose bad? Is this the purpose era? I think the question is, what's driving the work? Is it, I need to keep up with the trend? Or is it, we're going to assemble, intentionally assemble a group of people who are going to put their heart as well as their brain into it? Because I think that's what leads to really great purposeful work.
That's such a great question to ask. Thank you. And Dagmara, I'm bringing you in here and thinking back to that question of what's driving the work. There was such a lovely array of craft on show. And sometimes, that sort of escapism that comes with just watching a beautiful film of people flying in the air in beautiful clothes. It doesn't always have to be sort of one size fits all. And I just wondered, what were the trends that stood out for you?
Thank you for this question. Well, my answer would be I would be on Mickey's said. So one of the trends is like purpose-driven crafts. So it's not enough to have almost always it's not enough to have a beautiful design and a great idea, but you have to stand for something, or at least create a unique experience for customers to make a little change in the world. So if you look at the work that got awarded, so it's like Pain Stories by Libres, Superhumans, Plastic of Liverpool, The Wish, Liquid Billboard, they all stand for something. So whether we like it or not, this is one of the trends in the industry. But hopefully there are some beautiful pieces of work like Burberry or Pepsi, like the very classic design, but with a wit observation. And it's always something that is awarded, spotted, and appreciated by audience.
It's so interesting as well in terms of where we are collectively emotionally in the wake of the pandemic. I feel like just generally all our emotions are a bit closer to the surface right now, and that sort of need to connect with something that stands for something. And Tanya, I'd love to bring you in here, because that connection piece, and actually I suppose on the flip side of that, sometimes we just want to absolutely not connect with anything and just laugh a lot about something. But do you think we're going to see a bigger focus on humanity and going back to Mickey's term, I love this radical humanism, in terms of that desire to connect? Do you think we're going to see more of that in the creative process?
I believe brands don't have a choice. because if you want to make an impact in culture, in society, ultimately for your business, you need to resonate with your consumers. You need to understand them and, uncover the truth that we spoke about earlier, because consumers simply ignore advertising that ignores them. It's very simple. There is so much ads out into the world. If you don't find a sweet spot to connect with your target audience, you're just drowning in a sea of other ads. And I think one of the winners that we've seen was Decathlon with the breakaway. And what I loved about their work is that ultimately they've been tearing down prison walls by inviting prisoners to compete in a bicycle race. And the only thing they did is they treated everyone like a human. And I think that's very powerful.
And that sort of humanity as well, in terms of the judging process itself, because it's very unique, Gerety, having this kind of all-female judging panel. And I'd love to sort of talk about that experience a bit. I mean, Nikki, what was the process like for you, and how is it different? Because it's such a different lens to look at the work through. I mean, what stood out from the experience for you?
Well, it's by far the most dynamic, sort of enriching panel I've been on. I mean, and that sounds like I'm shilling for Gerety, but it's quite true. And it was very interesting for me to meet people both client side and also on agency side and see this kind of, really lively debate, because it's not like we're like in a room, oh, we're all girls and we're all going to agree. We really debated fiercely about the work, the work that we liked and what we thought it represented. It's not a kind of monolithic, view of what it means to be a woman or see things through a creative lens. It's really just a spirited, debate of creatively driven people that are passionate. And that was really exciting to me.
I love that. And the idea that everyone would automatically agree, or actually that consensus is always good, is just one that needs to be challenged. And Amali, I'd love to bring you in here. What was your favorite part of the process?
Well, I mean, that's easy, the discussion. Really agree with what Mickey's saying there. It was just a really interesting debate. There wasn't loads of agreement, to be honest, but I think just the experience of being on a call with lots of women dialing in from so many different countries. I mean, how often do you get to experience that? So I really love that. But I guess what struck me was, it really tells you something about how you think about women and girls as an audience, and you look at the cultural context and some of the conversations that are happening around women, Me Too, Amber Heard, Roe v. Wade, the way the culture moves forward for women, it moves back. There's so much that's changing and it's really messy. And I think the learning is, don't assume what women think and feel about any of this stuff, actually. There's just so many different nuanced perspectives in modern times when it comes to women's issues. And obviously that differs by age and culture and location, ethnicity, all those different intersections. So I think when, women or girls is your audience, assume ignorance and start there. Certainly working on Lego Friends and looking at the girls' audience, I've been surprised many, many times over. So yes, this audience will surprise you, and there's going to be a lot of diversity within that group.
That's such a good point, and there is that sort of real truth that assumption can be the real death knell for creativity. And Tanya, I'd love to bring you in on this, because there's something actually really special about, also it's everyone's very busy, of that sort of act of actually just looking at a lot of work at once, actually, like a real smorgasbord of different creative ideas and approaches. What was the key takeaway for you?
You always go to this two-step process, right? You immerse yourself all by yourself, whatever time of the day or the night, into the work, and you review a lot, and the ones that interest you, you probably even research, and then you have a point of view, and then you go into a discussion. And I was in a panel with Mickey, and then, you know, you debate the work, and everyone in the jury is coming from a different background. Sometimes it's clients, sometimes it's agency, it's you know, creatives and strategy, and it's different upbringings, and it sways you, you know, not on everything, but I think what everyone brings in is a different perspective. And that's what I love about the process. And I think even though we are all from different backgrounds, what unites us is our passion for creativity. And that gives so much room for listening and for sharing and for empathy. And then that allows really fruitful and healthy debates. And I think that's really important, because ultimately the winners are kind of the benchmark for the creative industry, right? This is what you want to put out for others to look after, and you don't want that to be made upon one person's opinion, but kind of different ones. And I just believe that this sharing of different perspectives just makes our decisions better.
I love that. And Dagmar, I'd love to bring you in here, because that whole point about that actually sometimes your point of view can be changed, and that's not always a bad thing, right? You know, it's not always totally fixed. You could see a different point of view, and you can really kind of build on that sort of collaboration, but also challenging each other. What surprised you about the judging process?
Like, beautiful discussion full of empathy and willingness to look at projects and at work through somebody else's lenses. So this openness, no ego trace in the room. It was so refreshing, inspiring, and energizing. But at the end of the day, what surprised me the most, it was the fact that the women's jury choice really doesn't differ from choice of other festival boards. So, you know, when we look at something beautiful, extraordinary, it's a really big idea, then we all speak the same creative language. And either something inspires us, moves us, either it makes us laugh or not. And it's in fact, it doesn't matter whether you're a woman or man or a clerk or whoever you are. It's just the beautiful work that moves you, the big idea that changes your attitude towards a product, that makes you choose something or not, like something or not. So it was my discovery that the women's choices doesn't really differ from the choices of the rest of the world.
And it just switching the discussion slightly, because I always like to boil it down to the practical as well, right? Because it's so inspiring going through all the award-winning work and listening to you all. But it's equally true, sometimes it's really tough. Like, we talk a lot about cultures of creativity, cultures of curiosity, but then, you know, there's been 147% increase in the time we spend in Microsoft Teams meetings since February 2020. Like, some point, some of these terms feel generic, you know, and I love the practicalities already of actually, if the ego is not in the room, then you can have a really honest discussion. But in terms of really having a culture of creativity, of really nurturing that, Amali, I'd love to put you on the spot. I mean, what are the key ingredients, and how, as a creative leader, do you really safeguard those?
Yeah, I mean, potentially this is more relevant to being client side and brand side, but certainly what I'm experiencing at Lego is, I guess, understanding the importance of the media landscape. And we work within such a deep ecosystem. You know, there's publishing and gaming and retail, entertainment, PR, you know, Legoland. And so tying all those touch points together with all those different teams in a really cool way is a creative challenge. it might be something's happening in the TV show, and then we pull that out and think about, okay, what's the game, and how do we then translate that into a retail experience? So yeah, creating great creative thinking that seamlessly flows and connects across all the different channels. That really takes a village. So I think really key for modern creativity is really prioritizing collaboration and just cultivating those relationships with people who sit in different parts of the business, especially in a big place. But I think that's a good mindset to have wherever you are, especially with this barrier of we're all on Microsoft Teams all day long. I think you have to work harder to really build those relationships and get to know each other.
That's really good practical advice. Thank you. And Mickey, I'd love to bring you in here, because that collaboration point, it's such a key one, and the narrative definitely in the UK market is very much dominated by where you're working, not how you're working or how you're collaborating. And I'd really love to get a view from you. I mean, how do you nurture curiosity? Because we've almost got to the point where we're using it as a generic statement rather than an active state of being.
Well, first of all, I always hire for culture before anything else. And what I mean by that is that, yes, of course, talent matters and experience, but I really try and find a culture fit for this creative team that makes sense for me. And those are people that are the first to argue, the first to be provocative and challenging, because, I take care of L'Oreal for Publicis, and Publicis and L'Oreal are really an old marriage, a historic relationship, and it can be quite driven by hierarchy. So you really need creatives that are a bit brave and willing to, go in and challenge. So I try to think about that quite a lot. And I'm looking at something like, Spotify just a year ago, in response to the Great Resignation, they created this 365 days a year, like work from wherever you want. They still have physical spaces, but it's been quite a success in terms of retention. And Publicis has something called Work the World, where for 6 weeks you can work in any Publicis office anywhere in the world. And when they first announced it, none of my creatives asked me to do it. And I was like, come on, guys. This is such an opportunity. You need to go out. You need to be the other. You need to be in an environment where you've never been and integrate into the culture and learn things. And since then, we've had more, participating in it. But I think things like that are super important to remain curious. You can't look at the same environment and learn.
I love that, because you've given like really specific policy examples, right? Because it's so easy to say, oh yeah, we really want to value a culture of curiosity, but without actually any kind of ways to kind of enable that. And Tanya, I'd love to bring you in here, because Mickey obviously mentioned the Great Resignation, which proved not to be just a great headline, but a statement of fact. And now we've got quiet quitting, which is a kind of new headline, really kind of looking at the creative crisis of confidence in some places of the industry, and perhaps it's not quiet quitting, perhaps leaders aren't listening. But I'd love to get your advice, because quiet quitting or leaning at, that's not necessarily the path to sort of a fulfilling career. And so what would be your advice as to how to get your creative mojo back, both for individuals, but also for organizations?
I think creativity often is seen almost as the output, but it starts already much, much earlier. So I think one of the basis for success for womb stories is that we've started to ask questions with creativity and with empathy. So we used a lot of projection techniques. So we asked women to say, well, if their uterus was a place, what would it be? Or if it was a person, who would it be? And you got answers that were very surprising. Some said, well, it would be a very rude shop assistant, or it would be like a scene in a horror movie. And I think what we need to do is to start listen harder, but also allow, in our case, women to listen to themselves and also, to trust their experiences. And it leads you to paths that you wouldn't have thought of just because you are asking questions differently.
I love that example, and I sometimes do wonder, particularly with this once in a generation opportunity we have to reshape the workplace for the better, if we're asking the wrong questions. And Dagmara, I'd love to bring you in on that, because as an industry, we've been pretty fixated on where people are working, how many days are you in the office. There's been even, branding up how different agencies are working. And I'd love to get a view from you on sort of how we focus on making space to actually just create the best work. It's surely not just about where we sit.
For sure it's not, and there are always two sides of the coin. So on the one hand, creativity needs exchange of thoughts, needs meeting, needs an inspiring environment. That's how our brain works. So if we get a boost of endorphins and dopamine that happens to us when we meet in person, that helps, that triggers creativity. But on the other hand, never in the industry history we were able to work in such diverse teams and to invite to our creative projects, to our work, expertise from different origins. And that's all that we are given with remote work, with people working from different places, with exchange programs, etc. So, we just need to, we still need to learn how to profit, how to take most out of these opportunities that we happen to get with the technology development, with what pandemia has offered to us with the remote work, as we all switch to the remote work modes, with people who work from different places in the world on the same projects, and I think this we can build on it.
Yeah, I think that's such a great point about building on it, because sometimes we think when something doesn't work once that it doesn't work, but maybe there's other ways of doing things. Thank you all so much for sharing your insights from the awards. We really want to wrap up with some more practical advice for our audience, and really in terms of thinking about how we create the space to create the best work. One of the things that we thought would be really interesting is to hear from you in a real practical piece of advice for our listeners as to what one thing we could potentially say no to in order to be inspired and make work that really makes an impact and perhaps even goes on to win a Gerety Award. So to put you on the spot, Amali, I'd love to kick off with you, please.
I would say no to back-to-back meetings and carving out space for playtime, just time to just purely enjoy creative thinking with no agenda, not answering a brief, just time to play.
That is fantastic advice. And Tanya, what would be your advice?
Avoid creative development by committee. It just kills creative work. There is only one who leads the way, and that's the consumer.
Brilliant advice. And Dagmara, what would be your takeaway?
Just don't forget to have fun, because we all work in fun business, and that's why we probably joined the industry. So do remember to enjoy, to have fun, and to influence, but don't forget about humor and all the joy that comes with creativity.
Brilliant advice. And Mickey, what would be your takeaway?
I would say don't expect a banal brief to be breakthrough. if you have the ambition of truly creative work, you have to do a better job with the briefs, and the agency needs to challenge that.
That is such brilliant advice. Thank you all for sharing with us. There's been so many takeaways from that discussion, from radical humanism to less meetings, to that brilliant piece of advice of challenging the brief. And that could be really key to someone watching this today being on the list of the Gerety Award winners in the future. So thank you so much. And thank you everyone for tuning in. Thank you.